You were conditioned to believe that goodness is measured by how much you give up. Stay longer than is healthy. Forgive before you've healed. Need less, want less, take up less space. Over time, you learn to rename depletion as kindness and self-silencing as strength. But here is the truth that stings far more than reassurance ever will. You are not being kind. You are being used. You are not devoted. You are predictable. And the people taking from you understand that pattern perfectly. What you often call love is really the fear of becoming unnecessary. What you call virtue is frequently the reflex of abandoning yourself before anyone else can reject you. Many people are not suffering because the world is cruel. They remain stuck because someone keeps shielding them from consequences. And when that person is you, your life begins to shrink while theirs stays exactly the same. Each time you absorb pain that was never meant to be yours, you send a quiet but dangerous message. Accountability is optional as long as you're around. That is why your generosity feels like weight instead of meaning. You're exhausted in ways rest can't touch. You feel unseen despite being constantly accessible. This isn't a defect in who you are. It's the price of confusing morality with self-erasure. Compassion without limits does not restore people. It conditions them. Slowly, your giving turns into an unspoken agreement where you bleed in silence and they never change. Here is the boundary most people avoid at all costs. If doing good requires you to betray yourself, it is not goodness. It is fear disguised as virtue. Genuine care does not erase the one who gives it. And before you rush to rescue someone again, ask yourself one honest question. Are you helping them become stronger or teaching them to survive by draining you? If this unsettles you, it's because a long-held illusion is starting to fracture. Your exhaustion was never a sign of weakness. It was evidence that the rules you've been obeying have been extracting too much from you. To see why kindness keeps turning into pain, you need a lens stripped of comfort and sentimentality. That lens is cold. It is precise. And it begins with Machiavelli. More than 5 centuries ago, Machiavelli refused to study how people ought to behave. He focused on how they do behave when power, fear, and self-interest are involved. What he uncovered remains deeply unsettling. He wasn't advocating cruelty. He was exposing reality. One principle rises above all others. The person who tries to be good to everyone becomes defenseless against those who aren't. This isn't bitterness. It's repetition. It happens again and again. Not everyone is capable of being helped. And more importantly, not everyone wants to change. Some people don't seek growth. They seek relief. They don't want responsibility. They want an exit. And every time you intervene, you become that exit. Compassion without discernment does not create appreciation. It creates reliance. Remove consequences, and no one recovers. They learn how to remain broken safely. This has nothing to do with becoming heartless. It has everything to do with becoming accurate. Kindness without limits is not virtue. It is vulnerability masquerading as morality. And protecting yourself is not selfishness. It is intelligence earned through loss. When you stop trying to save everyone, you don't lose what makes you human. You simply stop sacrificing yourself for people who never intended to heal. The moment you accept that not everyone wants to be rescued, a more dangerous question surfaces. Why does the cost always fall on you? The answer isn't comfortable, but it is liberating. You didn't volunteer for this role. You were shaped into it. Early in life, you absorbed an unspoken rule. Your worth is proportional to how much you give. Being good meant tolerating discomfort. Saying no meant being labeled selfish, distant, or cold. So you began measuring your value by how much pain you could carry for others. Because you are competent, dependable, and emotionally resilient, the burden naturally found you. This isn't compassion, it's programming. No one announces the savior role out loud. You slip into it gradually, quietly. Guilt is the glue that keeps you stuck there. Every time you consider stepping back, the same thought arrests you. If I don't step in, who will? Machiavelli would not call this a moral failure. He would call it a strategic one. Your resources are limited. Your time is limited. And each time you rescue the wrong person, you are funding a future version of yourself that is more depleted and less powerful. Saving the wrong person is not generosity. It is self-erasure wearing the mask of virtue. Imagine a small boat drifting in open water. If you pull everyone aboard without discernment, especially those who refuse to row, the boat doesn't become compassionate. It goes under. Or imagine a fire kept alive by someone who refuses to let go of the match. If you keep running back inside to save them, you're not courageous. You're a willing casualty. This is the savior trap. You mistake obligation for morality. You reach for every hand, even when it drags you beneath the surface. But stepping away is not betrayal. It's clarity. Not every hand must be held. And rescuing the wrong person is the fastest way to disappear yourself. When the savior trap finally becomes visible, guilt doesn't soften. It erupts. Because guilt was never a guide for morality. It was a tool of control. The instant you stop asking why you're drained and begin asking who gains from it, the illusion collapses. What you're facing isn't a single adversary, but 7 faces of destruction, quiet, respectable, and perfectly built to live off your silence. We begin with the first pattern, the chaos engine. This is the person whose presence turns life unstable, yet somehow you're always the one defending them while your own world starts to unravel. You tell yourself they've just had bad luck. Those circumstances are unusually harsh on them, that anyone in their position would struggle. But pay attention to the rhythm. It's never a single setback. It's an endless chain of crises. One emergency bleeds into the next, and each one quietly demands your time, your money, or your emotional labor. Jobs fall apart, relationships implode, bridges burn, and still, accountability never lands. The boss was unfair, the partner was abusive, the system was broken. Misfortune seems to follow them everywhere, not because life is cruel, but because responsibility never stays long enough to teach a lesson. This isn't a chance, it's repetition. Here's the truth most people avoid admitting. When you rush in to clean up after them, the chaos doesn't resolve. It migrates. It leaves their life and settles into yours. You start justifying their behavior, translating their excuses, protecting their image. You loan money that vanishes. You vouch for them in places they later destroy. You spend hours absorbing emotional fallout from storms they keep generating. And every time, you hope this crisis will finally wake them up. It never does. Because the chaos engine has no incentive to want stability. Stability demands accountability. Chaos allows them to remain the victim. Each disaster resets the narrative and spares them from confronting who they are becoming. Their life never improves for one simple reason. Failure teaches nothing when someone else keeps paying the price. You become the buffer between them and reality. And when reality stops teaching them, it redirects the lesson to you in the form of stress, anxiety, and erosion. You lose sleep. Your reputation suffers. Your sense of calm deteriorates. And still, guilt whispers that leaving would make you cruel. This is how capable people are dismantled quietly, not by enemies, but by misplaced loyalty to someone dependent on dysfunction. Picture tying your boat to a vessel already flooding. Your boat can be strong. Your intentions can be pure. None of that matters. The laws of physics don't negotiate. When one ship sinks, anything tethered to it follows. Human behavior works the same way. Chaos spreads through proximity. Stay close to someone who refuses responsibility long enough, and their consequences become yours. This isn't heartlessness. It's cause and effect. Walking away doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped deceiving yourself. You cannot save someone who keeps rebuilding the fire. You cannot stabilize a person who feeds on instability. And the most difficult truth is this: every extra day you remain, you permit more damage. Guarding your peace is not abandonment. It is self-respect. Because if you continue anchoring yourself to their collapse, you will eventually disappear beneath it. Second comes the never enough. This one cuts deeper because it never announces itself as a threat. It arrives disguised as need, as fragility, as someone who just needs a small push to stand again. The first time you step in, they are warm with gratitude. They thank you openly. They tell you how essential you were. You feel useful. You feel recognized. That's when the dynamic locks in. The next time, the appreciation fades. The words shorten. The eye contact slips. The humility thins out. By the third time, gratitude is gone entirely. What replaces it is expectation. They no longer ask. They presume. And when you slow down, when you hesitate, when you finally say, "You can't right now," the reaction shifts. Irritation surfaces. Guilt follows. Then distance. This is the nature of the bottomless pit. No matter how much you give, it will never be sufficient. Because the issue was never a shortage of help. It was a deficit of character. Dependence rewires people. When someone relies on you to function, appreciation erodes and entitlement takes its place. And entitlement quietly curdles into resentment. They begin to resent the very person they depend on, because your strength exposes what they refuse to develop in themselves. Your generosity becomes a mirror they don't want to face. So they take more. They ask for more. They demand more, and with each concession you make, you become less human to them. You stop being a person and start being a resource, a system, a function. This is why those you give the most to are often the quickest to turn against you. Not because you failed them, but because you stopped maintaining the illusion that your life belonged to them. The moment you restrict access, even slightly, the mask falls. Suddenly you're selfish. You've changed. You're not who you used to be. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's retaliation. They are punishing you for reclaiming yourself. Helping someone like this doesn't empower them. It diminishes them. It teaches them that someone else will always absorb the cost. And it teaches you that your boundaries are negotiable. Over time, you grow exhausted, resentful, and ashamed for feeling that resentment. But here is the line that cuts cleanly through the guilt. An ungrateful person isn't lacking support. They are lacking character. You are not cruel for stepping back. You are not heartless for saying no. You are responding to a pattern that survives only because you keep offering yourself as fuel. A bottomless pit cannot be filled. It can only be sealed. Third is the poison smile. This one cuts the deepest because it never comes from opposition. It comes from proximity, not from enemies or critics, but from friends, colleagues, even family. The very people who insist they want what's best for you. They don't frown when you speak about your ambitions. They smile. But there's a hesitation in their voice that makes you second-guess yourself. This is the quiet saboteur, the one who never says, "Don't do it," yet always plants just enough doubt to slow your momentum. Their interference doesn't sound like hostility. It sounds like a concern, like caution, like someone being realistic. Pay attention to the pattern. You share good news, and they immediately highlight the risks. You mention an opportunity, and they remind you of every past failure. You reach a decisive moment, and suddenly they're overflowing with warnings. This isn't protection. It's insecurity disguised as care. Your growth unsettles them, not because you're wrong, but because your progress forces them to confront what they've avoided changing in themselves. So they begin to erode your confidence gradually, in ways subtle enough to deny. Are you sure now is the right time? Isn't that risky? What if you're overestimating yourself? They never forbid you from moving forward. They just ensure you hesitate long enough to miss the opening. And if you succeed despite them, they shrink it. You got lucky. Anyone could have done that. It's not a big deal. This preserves their comfort. As long as you don't advance too far, they don't have to feel left behind. The danger here is quiet. You start distrusting your instincts. You stop sharing ideas. You feel guilty for wanting more. And if you try to carry them with you, the sabotage intensifies. Drama surfaces before critical moments. Advice becomes muddled. Support turns conditional, not because they despise you, but because they fear losing their position in your life. That's why distance here isn't cruelty. It's clarity. You don't need confrontation. You don't need explanations. You need momentum. Share less. Move silently. Let outcomes speak louder than intentions. Those who truly support you will feel encouraged by your growth, not threatened by it. And remember this, because it saves years of confusion. Not everyone who stays close wants you to go far. Fourth comes the emotional predator, the kind that stays alive by consuming your empathy. At first, there's no sense of loss. You don't feel drained. You feel important, needed, like you're the one person who finally gets them. That's how the trap stays invisible. They never confront you. They never demand outright. Instead, they unravel in front of you. Stories of hardship, of unfair treatment, of a life that has been relentlessly cruel. Change, they insist, feels impossible for them. And because you're not indifferent, you step forward. You listen. You reassure. You shoulder what they insist they can't carry. What most people fail to notice is this. Their pain isn't just something they endure. It becomes who they are. Suffering hardens into identity. Brokenness becomes a role. And every time you rush in to help, you don't guide them out of it. You reinforce it. There is always a reason transformation has to wait. They're too depressed, too anxious, too damaged, too misunderstood. Any real solution threatens the one thing that keeps them safe. Exemption from responsibility. Offer a path forward, and they'll explain why it won't work. Encourage strength, and they retreat further into weakness. Not deliberately, but reliably. This is why rescuing them makes them smaller, not stronger. Rescue removes the pressure that growth requires. The shift happens the moment you pull back. When you finally say you can't carry them anymore, gratitude evaporates. Their tone sharpens. You're no longer compassionate. You're cruel. You didn't set a boundary, you abandoned them. They rewrite the narrative so that your exhaustion becomes their wound. This is empathy turned into a weapon. You begin questioning yourself. You feel guilty for wanting space. You wonder if something is wrong with you. But look closely. They were never walking beside you. They were leaning on you to avoid standing alone. Compassion without limits doesn't rescue people like this. It rewards stagnation. It teaches them that helplessness works, and teaches you that your role is to suffer quietly so they don't have to. This isn't love. It's a transaction where you pay the cost and nothing changes. Stepping away isn't betrayal. It's the moment you stop financing their collapse. You are not responsible for carrying someone who refuses to carry themselves. And remember this, because it cuts cleanly through guilt. Loving the wrong person doesn't make you noble. It makes you the one who absorbs the punishment. Fifth is the ego tyrant. This one doesn't drain you through helplessness, but through endless conflict. You spot the mistake before it happens. You warn them. You lay it out calmly. You even bring proof. And instead of listening, they come for you. Not because you're incorrect, but because you've wounded their ego. They aren't searching for the truth. They're searching for validation. They don't want to understand reality. They want reality to submit to their self-image. That's why every conversation becomes a contest. Every warning is treated as an insult. Every attempt to help turns into a confrontation you never agreed to enter. At first, you believe patience will fix it. You think one more explanation will finally get through. But explanation only feeds the problem. They twist meanings. They argue over wording. They ridicule caution. They laugh at the risks you point out. And when everything collapses exactly as you predicted, reflection never comes. The blame shifts. To the system, to bad luck, to you for being negative. This is why engaging with them feels draining and circular. You aren't exchanging ideas, you're reinforcing a defense mechanism. Their identity is tied to being right, even when being right destroys them. And the moment you challenge that identity, you become the threat. Over time, this dynamic erodes you. You start questioning your own judgment. You replay conversations endlessly. You grow exhausted, caring more about their future than they do. But here is the truth that releases you. You cannot logic someone out of a position they never arrived at logically. When the real issue is ego, reasoning is useless. Admitting you're right would require them to accept being wrong, and their pride cannot pay that price. So they defend it at all costs, even their own well-being. The shift happens when you disengage. Your energy returns, your mind clears. Silence becomes your boundary. Not coldness, not contempt. Simply the refusal to bleed for someone who confuses arrogance with confidence. Let reality do what discussion never could. Consequences teach lessons that arguments cannot. And when they fall, because they will, don't rush to say, "I told you so." Distance is enough. You were never meant to be their instructor. You were never meant to carry the burden of someone addicted to being right. Remember this when you feel tempted to re-enter the debate. No one learns a lesson they aren't willing to pay for. Walking away isn't weakness. It's proof that you value clarity over winning an argument that was never yours to win. Sixth comes the trust killer. This one dismantles people in a way nothing else does, not because the betrayal shocks you, but because it repeats, again and again. You forgive the first time because you believe mistakes happen. You forgive the second because you believe people can change. You forgive once more because they cry, because they promise, because they swear this time will be different. And each time, you tell yourself love requires patience. that loyalty means enduring discomfort. But the one who betrays repeatedly learns something from every chance you give them. Not responsibility, permission. They learn exactly how far they can go and still be welcomed back. The cycle never changes. Apologies, tears, rationalizations, a brief stretch of good behavior. Then the same wound, reopened with greater precision. This isn't confusion. It isn't coincidence. It's behavior repeating itself. And repeated behavior isn't an accident. It's character revealing itself. When forgiveness comes without consequences, nothing heals. You don't repair trust. You eliminate the cost of breaking it. You teach them that your limits bend and your pain is survivable. Over time, something dangerous shifts. They stop fearing the loss of you. And the moment someone no longer fears losing you, respect quietly disappears. That's why unconditional forgiveness doesn't create loyalty. It creates calculations. They begin thinking ahead. If they took me back after that, they'll take me back after this. You become predictable, safe to harm, easy to return to. And every time you let them back in, something inside you diminishes. Your self-respect thins. Your instincts go quiet. You start questioning whether you're allowed to be angry, even when the pattern is undeniable. This is the true damage of repeated betrayal. Not just what they do to you, but what you slowly accept as normal. Walking away from someone who betrays you repeatedly is brutal because it feels like abandoning hope. But here is the truth most people refuse to face. You are not ending the relationship. They ended it the moment they chose themselves over your trust. You are simply refusing to participate in the aftermath. Distance isn't revenge, it's protection. You don't owe unlimited access to someone who has proven they cannot be trusted with it. Forgiveness does not require closeness. Loyalty does not require self-erasure. There comes a point where mercy stops being noble and starts being lethal. Remember this when guilt pulls you back. Forgiveness without limits isn't holiness. It's self-destruction. Choosing yourself isn't bitterness. It's survival. Seventh is the silent bystander. This one is difficult to recognize because it hides behind the illusion of neutrality. They never insult you. They never betray you openly. They never attack. They simply vanish at the exact moments when their presence would matter most. They describe themselves as peaceful. They say they avoid drama. They insist they don't take sides because they're mature. When you're treated unfairly, they soften their voice. When someone crosses a line with you, they redirect the conversation. When your reputation is questioned, they remain conveniently silent. You tell yourself they're conflict averse, that they mean well, that not everyone is built for confrontation. But here is the truth that's harder to face. Their silence is not harmless. It comes with a cost, and you're the one paying it. Every time they choose neutrality in the presence of harm, they protect their comfort by sacrificing your dignity. They don't need to attack you directly. Their absence gives permission to those who do. Over time, this becomes a quiet form of betrayal. You show up for them. You defend them when they're not present. You offer loyalty. But when the weight shifts onto you, they disappear. They don't correct lies. They don't set boundaries. They don't say your name when doing so would cost them safety or approval. And this imbalance corrodes you. You begin to wonder if you're asking for too much, if expecting support is unreasonable. It isn't. Loyalty doesn't have to be loud, but it is always visible. The silent bystander confuses peace with goodness. But peace that depends on injustice is not peace at all. It is cowardice dressed up as virtue. Their fear of conflict sends a clear signal. You are safe to mistreat. Bullies recognize it. Manipulators recognize it. Silence becomes permission. That's why the damage cuts so deeply. It's not only what was done to you, it's who watched it happen and chose comfort over integrity. And the longer this pattern continues, the more you shrink to preserve the relationship. You stop speaking up. You swallow anger. You learn to endure quietly so no one feels disturbed. That is the trap. Distance here is not cruelty. It is self-respect. You don't need someone to fight every battle for you. You only need to know they won't disappear when it matters. If another person's comfort consistently outweighs your dignity, they are not neutral. They have already chosen a side. Remember this when guilt tries to pull you back. Silence in the face of injustice is still siding with the harm. After every pattern has been named, every face exposed, one question remains that most people refuse to look at directly. What if your instinct to rescue was never really about saving anyone else? What if it was a way to stay in motion, to avoid the silence where you would have to face yourself? Helping can become a form of escape when stillness feels threatening. Repairing others feels purposeful when turning inward feels unbearable. Some people don't step in because they are strong. They step in because stopping would force them to confront an old wound they never learned how to sit with. That doesn't make you fragile. It makes you human. But it does keep the pattern alive. Every time you invest your energy into something broken, you delay your own repair. You stay busy so you don't have to be present. You keep moving so you don't have to listen. And yet, truth doesn't appear in motion. It waits in stillness. This isn't an accusation. It's an opening. A different kind of work begins when you stop asking who needs you and start asking which part of you was taught that love must involve pain. That path doesn't offer dramatic revelations or instant relief. It offers something quieter and more demanding: honesty. And honesty doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. But it outlasts chaos every time. Hold on to this as the final shadow falls. Sometimes the person you've been trying to rescue your entire life is a version of yourself that never learned how to feel safe. Eventually, the focus shifts. It's no longer about who hurt you, drained you, or needed you. It becomes about the moment you recognize how much of your life has been consumed by reacting, rescuing, justifying, and enduring. You weren't flawed for caring. You were simply never shown where care must end. Clarity rewrites everything. When you stop pursuing chaos, chaos loses its leverage over you. When you stop sustaining broken patterns, they collapse under their own weight. The world does not reward endless sacrifice. It rewards judgment, discernment, precision. The most powerful change you will ever make isn't becoming colder or harder. It's becoming exact. You don't close your heart. You refine your focus. You learn that peace isn't created by saving everyone. It's created by choosing carefully where your energy belongs. This isn't abandonment. It's adulthood. And once you step across that line, there's no return. Because you finally grasp what most people never do. Your life is not a rescue mission. It is a responsibility.